Good evening. I'm Garrett Domblewski. Thank you for joining us on 7 After 6. I'm joined tonight by Shane Dudley from Cornell Cooperative Extension, registered dietitian and nutritionist. Shane, we're going to talk a little bit about the Trump administration's new guidelines for people's diets. Relatively similar to what they've been for a while, but there's some key things that they've changed the focus to protein intake and different types of fat that people are consuming. But where would you start if you were telling people what the difference is between this and previous guidance?
I would start similar to how you did, saying that they're by and large pretty similar. The biggest takeaways as far as what's new do have to do with the protein. It's gone from 0.8 grams per kilogram up to a range of 1.2 to 1.6, which for a lot of Americans, we are getting adequate protein from our diets, but this does bump it up a little bit. They have also changed the approach to the dietary fats. We see in that new inverted pyramid, we're getting a lot of red meat representation, high quality animal sourced protein sources. They are really at the forefront. And I'm so sorry, I've already forgotten the...
Yeah, how would you kind of frame the changes for folks? You were given the example of what the protein changes are, and then also the fats.
So we've actually heard Secretary Kennedy very explicitly state that red meat is kind of back at the forefront in the press releases. They are talking about cooking foods in butter and beef tallow. There's a lot more representation of that saturated fat component, which does turn a lot of existing evidence on its head and relies on some studies that have not necessarily been the most well-powered. So the recommendation remains 10% of our daily energy intake. We shouldn't go over that in terms of our saturated fat. A lot of it, again, it is similar. The other thing that they're encouraging is the whole fat dairy, similar to the red meat argument, increasing the saturated fat representation, because decades of research may not have been the most complete, which is true. Science is always evolving. We're always learning more things, and we're trying to sort of sharpen that message to be more accurate and truthful. I think dairy's great. The serving recommendations are the same. We should be getting 2 to 3 servings a day. And if the choice for someone is between whole fat dairy and no dairy, absolutely. Go for the whole milk, go for the full fat cheese. But if that doesn't fit your lifestyle, if it doesn't fit your preferences, it's still perfectly okay to have 1% or skim.
And I think for a lot of folks, things become political when the different administration comes in and upends certain things. But a lot of this is very individual. I mean, it's just guidance. It isn't something where they're saying you have to change the way you eat, but it is emphasizing, I think, the stance of where the government is on what they think should be prioritized in the diet. Is that a fair read on it?
Yeah, there are. I don't normally wear glasses, but since the guidelines come out, I've gone through a little over 600 pages of their scientific foundation, of the guidelines themselves, and sort of trying to get a read on the nutrition community overall understanding, both from a scientific standpoint and from a political standpoint. Because when we look at the initial release from it, what was concerning to me at the outset, I've backed off from that ire as the days have gone by, but they said that these guidelines are to support American producers, American farmers, American ranchers. They did not say that they're designed to support American families, American children, American households. So it does seem like there's a political slant in that way, where they're favoring producers over consumers, which is concerning just from a health standpoint. And it really does come down to the individualization approach. We should be individualizing a lot of these guidelines. We should be prioritizing the health of people over businesses.
An interesting way of approaching it when it comes, because I think when it comes to healthcare, they've been sort of attacking some of these big companies and saying they need to support the consumers, the people in need of healthcare. And in this case, it sounds like they might be supporting the people who are producing the food rather than the people who they're telling what they should eat.
It's an interesting double-edged sword. They are touting a lot of radical transparency, particularly in terms of the science. They're saying that a lot of this research has been flawed or is weak. The evidence just isn't there to support some of these claims, which is phenomenal. We are constantly learning more. Nutrition is one of the most rapidly changing fields of healthcare. We're always learning new things. We're always refining kind of the message. But when we talk about the transparency, we also have to look at the people who are providing the message. I can tell you that I'm not receiving any money from, the Cattle Ranchers Association or the Pork Board or Dannon or any of these other large corporations that have a financial interest in what Americans are eating. My only interest is wanting to see, you and myself and everyone else live happy and healthy. That's kind of the biggest political slant that I can take.
Sure. So when you look at this and folks at home look at the new guidelines, how do you think they should interpret them? How should they take that and incorporate it into their lives? Should they make changes based on this, or should it be something where they should always be thinking about the foods that they're eating and how healthy they are for them?
Always being conscious is the hope. We always want people to be aware of what they're putting in their bodies. We always want to empower people to know what nutrients might be found in certain types of food. I think some of the biggest takeaways that American consumers can have with these new guidelines are the same as when the guidelines came out in 2020 and when they came out in 2015, is that we should be eating a wide array of fruits and vegetables, making sure that we are prioritizing like these new guidelines are saying. That's kind of the double-edged sword, is that there's kind of the corporate slant, but a lot of what they're pushing, the whole grains, phenomenal. We're getting a lot of fiber, we're getting protein, we're getting complex carbohydrates, all things that we need. Prioritizing lean protein sources to make sure that we hit that new goal. That's great advice. Eating our fruits and vegetables, however you want to consume dairy that fits your lifestyle, that's great. We have a sort of a new green light for people who love whole milk. So always trying to improve little things, adhering to the guidelines as they are. This isn't quite the radical shift that it's being touted to be in terms of the content. The messaging is by and large the same. Get your whole grains, eat your fruits and veggies, stay hydrated, and just eat a balanced and diverse diet.
I think one of the other things in it is it talks about, and I think they called it, the administration itself called it a war on added sugars. Mm-hmm. But I think that's always been something that the last maybe 20 years or so has been at the forefront of healthy choices, is balancing your sugar intake and where you're getting sugar from. And I think that's kind of a confusing thing for a lot of folks, is what constitutes added sugar. I've had plenty of conversations with people where they say like, oh, apple, there's so much sugar in that. But it's like, well, there is, but it's healthy sugar and it's with fiber and it's naturally occurring, and there's all these reasons why your body can take that sugar and healthily use it versus drinking a Coca-Cola or something like that.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting areas where it's been widely known and becoming more widely known over the last 20 or so years that we should be reducing the added sugars, but it hasn't necessarily been from a policy standpoint. Mm-hmm. The 2020 guidelines suggested reducing those, but it didn't put a hard and fast limit, and it was a little less aggressive in terms of limiting the added sugars for children. When we're thinking about what an added sugar is, it's not, like you said, it's not the apple. The sugars that are in there, they're different, and they're involved in different molecules in certain ways, and we can get into the nitty-gritty. I'd be here for hours talking to you about that, but what matters for people who are looking to make changes to their diet is the sugars that are present in an apple, in a pear, in an orange. Those are great. We need those for quick sources of energy. They do give us some of the fiber. What we want to be reducing are sugary breakfast cereals, in some ways the maple syrup that we put on our pancakes. There's sugar in the pancake mix that we're likely using. Those are what we need to be careful of. Those are what are associated with increased risk for chronic diseases. At much higher levels, there could be increased risk for certain types of cancer, for all these things that we don't want to see later in life. So making sure that we are going more toward those whole form sources of the foods, that is going to lead us down kind of a path to lifestyle and diet success.
When it comes to the kid thing, how do you get your kids to eat less sugary foods? Because I think especially if you've been eating a lot of sugary foods as a kid, you don't want to give that up. You don't want to give up the, Reese's Puffs or whatever it is for, I guess oatmeal or something like that. I mean, as an adult, I would prefer to eat oatmeal because I feel fuller after eating it. But I think that as a kid, it's hard to get your kids to want to eat healthier foods sometimes. So how do you do that? Is there a way to shift them towards better foods in the morning?
Yeah, I won't say it's easy. There are absolutely going to be there will be some pushback. I think that's a natural process, both in terms of, your child might be learning to exercise some independence. And one of the first ways that we can do that is through our food choices. So there could be a bit of pushback there. They could also be thinking, oh, this tastes great. Why are you saying I can't have this anymore? It's so good. Involving them in the process at an age appropriate extent. If they're really young, run some water over these beans, or one of the first tasks that I had as a child in the kitchen was trimming green beans. And green beans ended up being one of my favorite vegetables to eat as a kid. So any way that we're able to involve children in the process of making food as they get older, involving them in the process of planning out meals, really helping them develop some ownership over the food choices, having conversations with them, at an age-appropriate level, encouraging them to have foods that are brightly colored because it's good for their brains. Red foods, it's good for your heart. Blue foods for your brain. Really tailoring the message to the developmental stage. And if we can, even just a gradual shift, depending on what they like, for the Reese's Puffs, you might be able to go for even like a 50-50 split. There's no rules in terms of the food where they're having a little bit less, or they're even mixing some of the Reese's Puffs into the oatmeal, sort of just shifting those balances, where eventually they could just be enjoying the oatmeal, or we just help them understand that the Reese's Puffs, it's not something that we want to have, but every once in a while, if we're doing all these other things that we need to for our health, some exercise, making sure that we are eating more of the fruits and vegetables and whole grains, there's that a little bit more of a balance to be struck.
One thing I think that also is difficult when it comes to sugar and added sugars is, let's take oatmeal for example too. I get, the big tub of rolled oats now because that has 0 sugar added. You have to do everything yourself to it. But if you get those little packets of, quick oatmeal, especially the flavored ones, a lot of times that's 5-10 grams of added sugar in just one packet of those. Now, how do people approach those kind of things healthily and warily? How do you kind of make sure that you're keeping track of what you're consuming in that aspect?
Learning to read a nutrition label is not a skill a lot of us are taught, and if we were, it happened way back in grade school. So refreshing yourself, there are resources on the USDA website for how to read a nutrition label, making sure you're staying under that, like what you said, kind of that range, 5 to 10 grams of added sugar per food serving, or just the item itself. Look for the ingredients on the label and the list, things that are ending in ose. That's usually a great indicator that it is a sugar, because sugars have all sorts of different names. They come in all kinds of different forms. Sucrose, dextrose, maltose, just, to name a few.
The longer the name, usually the worse it is for you too, right? You start adding compound words.
Yes and no, because there are plenty of words that are completely naturally occurring. Today, or this week, I think, there's a National Marzipan Day, and the compound that's just naturally found in bitter almonds that's responsible for that cherry smell. It's got a big, long 3 or 4 syllable name. Hard to pronounce unless you're a food scientist, but it's naturally occurring. It tastes great, and it's nothing to be afraid of. So, just the education piece is what becomes the empowerment, because people know what it is. They know that they don't have to be afraid of it, but they can still make the choice to eat less of it because it's not good for them at the end of the day.
I guess for anybody who's looking to make that change or slowly make a change, where do you start? What are some guidelines that people can have? Obviously, we have these new federal guidelines that we're talking about, but how do you take the encouragement to eat whole foods and different categories of food and then build an actual diet or structure what you buy at the grocery store out of?
I would say there are 2 things that you can do really to start, and that's figure out why you want to make the change. Because if you're just making a change because you think you need to, it might not be as likely to stick around for the long term. So figure out what really matters to you. Why do you want to make the change? What do you want to get out of it? That's step 1. Step 2 is start small and accept that it's not going to be a perfect process. If you think, all right, I'm done eating added sugars today, I'm done drinking alcohol today, I'm going to start going to the gym for an hour and a half today. Again, you're starting really big. Those are great goals to have, but sometimes you're going to want a packet of oatmeal for a snack. Sometimes you're not going to want to go to the gym. What matters over time is that we build up those behaviors. Start small, start slow. It's the tortoise and the hare. Start low and slow, and you'll get to where you want to be. If you have specific concerns, if you need more guidance, talk to your doctor, ask about a referral to a registered dietitian. We're here for that exact reason, to help you make those long-term changes. We can even help in that process of just having a discussion, figuring out what it is that you want to accomplish with a diet or a lifestyle change. That's half the battle right there. Because once you know what you want to change, why you want to change it, everything is so much easier. You're not grasping for straws. You're not forcing yourself to do something that you don't actually like to do without a really strong why behind it. So know why you want to do it and start slow.
I think one thing that might help too is when I, probably 10 years ago, started trying to really care about what I'm eating, I would pick here are things I already eat that I like and I know are healthier for me. So now I'm just going to make sure that that's always something I have. And I incorporate that, every day or every 2 days. And I'm making sure that I always have things around that no matter what I'm eating, I have things I like, but that are also good for me. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but it's helped me. I think that's probably similar to what you're saying, is that start slow and find something that helps you kind of stick to your goal.
Yeah,
and have a goal.
Something else that you touched on there too is it's almost a strengths-based approach. It's something that you like to eat. It's a behavior that you can do successfully. And when we do something that we think, we did it right, we feel good, we want to do it again. So you're focusing on a decision that you think you're able to make really well, and you're able to consistently make that decision, and that gives you the confidence and the joy, in a way, to make another decision. And you can just keep building on those successes. You can keep building on those changes. So what starts out small, just like 1 or 2 foods, if the only fruit you like is cantaloupe, okay, I can get my fruit, I can eat cantaloupe. If you do that enough times, you can say, maybe I want to try strawberries next, or maybe I want to try a different vegetable. So no matter how small you're starting, having that thing that that you can do well, that you can do quote unquote right, sets you up to do so many more things right down the road.
And then gets easier to do that next thing because you've now built a little bit of a foundation for yourself to start from.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Shane, anything else you'd like to add on just dietary stuff in general, or on the new guidelines, how people should use them or interpret them? Anything at all?
I think the only other thing that we didn't really touch on would be, we did indirectly in terms of eating the whole food sources, is that this is the first time that we've really seen a push against, the highly processed foods. things that are, they've been considered in the past junk food, or the term I like to use is play food, because, are we really eating junk, or is it different? We can't play all the time. We got to do some work. But that is a concerted effort of the new guidelines in encouraging Americans to eat less processed foods. And that feeds into this kind of give and take, where if we focus on a concept called nutrition by addition, we are adding the whole sources of foods, which is naturally going to kind of displace some of those much more processed foods. It accomplishes the goal of getting us more fiber, more protein, more vitamins and minerals. And it's a way that we don't have to feel bad about the decisions we're making too. Because if someone's telling you you're eating too many processed foods, you're probably not going to feel great about yourself, right?
Right.
But if someone says, hey, do more of this thing, it gives you a goal, and it doesn't make you feel bad for what's happening right now. So it's sound advice, but just repackaging the messaging a little bit, I think it can go a long way. And that's something that I want people to take away from it, is that, yeah, you can do all these things, and you can think about them in a way that's sustainable to you, that doesn't make you feel bad for what you're doing, but makes you excited to make changes in the future.
And like we just talked about, big changes are hard to make. Processed foods often, because there's so much sugar, you want to eat it. So it's hard to go from eating it all the time, or however much you may eat it, to not eating it at all.
Yeah, and they constitute a huge part of the diet. So to make that shift, starting small, you can make that big change to make them a lower and lower contributor to the diet.
And like you said, play foods, I think that's a good example, because like if you get home from the gym and you just, we're on the treadmill for 45 minutes or something like that, and then you're going to need sugar. Is that a bad time to eat something a little processed or a little sugary? Is that reinforcing a bad habit maybe, or is that the time where it might be okay to do that? Because a lot of people say, well, it's that I earned this kind of attitude that sometimes you feel like when you've, worked really hard or something like that. Is that something you'd advise against, or is that something that kind of every now and then isn't the worst thing?
It depends on the level of awareness. I have quite a sweet tooth. I'm a baker when I'm not a registered dietitian. I really enjoy a lot more of those kind of discretionary foods. I have a box of the instant oatmeal packets because yesterday morning I woke up and before 8:30 a.m. I had already run a half marathon. It's hard for me to eat enough to just support my body, and a lot of those foods are really efficient sources, and they are, when I'm tired, I'm cold. It was pretty chilly yesterday morning. It is comforting. But if we start to think about it, like you said, as I earned this, that can feed into some more negative behaviors. We get into a little bit more of disordered eating territory, where we think that we have to earn things that we enjoy. No, we deserve to enjoy things. Eating, on average, if we're eating 3 times a day, that's something that we're consciously choosing to do at least 21 times a week. I can't think of many other things that we choose to do that often in life. And if we have to do it that often, we should find a way to enjoy it. And if every once in a while that means the instant oatmeal packet, or it means a little bag of like Gushers or something, or a bowl of Count Chocula, it does, come down to the individual, what's appropriate and what's not. But there's a way to learn to incorporate 1 or 2 of those foods, but less is definitely going to be better. And we have, instead of the Gushers, have some dried fruit, or have a piece of dark chocolate and some with some peanut butter instead of the Reese's Puffs. There are those healthier swaps, but every once in a while, moderation is key. That's kind of what it all ends up boiling down to, right?
And as you said, you start incorporating whole foods, you're going to be more full often. So that's going to curb that appetite for some of those junk food things a little bit more. And then when you do have it, it becomes maybe a little bit more of a treat rather than a daily staple.
Yeah, and being mindful of all of those experiences as well. A lot of these foods are hyper palatable. They're so tasty. And if we really tune into the moment, thinking about all of the sensory experiences of it, really just enjoying that food for what it is, and then kind of putting it away, it doesn't become something that we're just seeking out ravenously. And if we have some of those cravings, sometimes it's better to indulge in them before it gets to a point where we end up binging on them. Especially in food, eating disorders are on the rise, and we don't want to give in to those. So when we're trying to make these changes, especially in the early stages, even sometimes a little later on, it can be really hard. And if we have some of those cravings, if it's for a really greasy cheeseburger or something, and we want the bacon on it, we want the fried egg, sometimes it's okay to have a little bit of that when we want it up front, instead of saying no, 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 and then having to reconcile a just a full-blown, I'm just gonna have a triple cheeseburger with extra cheese and onions, because
and the milkshake and the large fry and the everything on top of it, because you've let yourself kind of get to that point where it's sort of like your will breaking a little bit.
Yeah, we never want to push ourselves too far. So enjoying a little bit every now and again is what makes it sustainable. Because as soon as we go for the triple stack with a large milkshake and fries, that's when we can get into the territory of saying, well, I guess I messed that up, and we put ourselves back at square one when we don't need to be. It's one event. If it happens, it happens, and you can just keep building on your positive changes that you've already been making. It gets into really sticky territory. It's not somewhere that I want anyone to be. So for the people that are reading these new guidelines, and because they're such a hot topic right now, this might be the first time people are being exposed to some of these federal nutrition guidelines in a critical way. To introduce those people who are starting to tune in to nutrition advice, it is start small, eat your fruits and veggies in a way that makes sense for you and your lifestyle. If you need help, that's what your doctor's there for. That's what registered dietitians are there for. The world is filled with people who only want the best for you, or who are going to help you meet your goals in a healthy way.
And again, anything else you'd like to add, or do you think you've kind of covered it now?
I think I've covered all that I can in the time. Like I said, we could sit here and talk about the guidelines for days, but I know we both have a lot of other things that we need to attend to. So I think that's it for right now.
All right, Shane, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching 7 After 6. Shane Dudley with Cornell Cooperative Extension. And I'm Garrett Domblewski. Have a good night.